Hello, everyone. We made it. We're almost there through the day. It's been such an exciting day. I've been really impressed with the quality and engaging speakers, the pitches. Well done to everyone. I wanted to start off this amazing panel by just giving a space for everyone to give a quick intro. And if you haven't heard about this advanced air mobility thing, wanted to give the space for each of you to kind of give your own definitions for what it means to you. So why don't I kick it off with Danny?
Thanks very much, Chris, and welcome everyone. I'm Danny Sitnam, President CEO for Helijet International. We're mostly in the vertical wing operations. You can probably see our heliport just on the other side of the window there. We operate an airline service to Victoria and Nanaimo. Our interest is to grow the program, grow the network with our partners such as Blade Urban Air Mobility out of New York to bring down the cost, become a little more sustainable using vertical lift technologies. So we're really focused on AAM and where the technology is going and where the infrastructure is required.
What's AAM to you?
Well, advanced air mobility is really talking about less friction in the air, less opportunity for everyone to use air as a mode of transport, as opposed to maybe the 2 or 3% that use it today.
Nice.
Hey, I'm Ben Howard with KinectAir, and I'd echo that with the AAM, that to us really it's making private aviation accessible to the public. So KinectAir is doing the infrastructure layer of what will allow the public to connect to the analog world of aviation today. And so we're doing that by digitizing it and making it a lot more efficient on the sustainability side of things.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Catherine Kolimas Schorm. I am a managing director within the investment banking division at Goldman Sachs. I primarily focus on the transportation and aviation industry more broadly, including kind of the commercial sort of legacy side of the business. I also co-head our aviation technology effort, which focuses on covering many of the AAM players. And I think for us, when we think about AAM or aviation technology, we take a very holistic approach. We think about everyone who's thinking about sort of next generation aircraft tech, enabling technologies, suppliers, infrastructure developers that will be critical to supporting the success of this space, as well as software developers, the future of sort of autonomy and the role that that will play, and all of the kind of investors and strategic capital providers that ultimately support this space. In general, as an investment bank, we are here to sort of provide the matchmaking, if you will, between sort of capital providers and innovators, emerging businesses. And so that's really the role that we play and are excited and enthusiastic about supporting this innovation getting off the ground. So this is the perfect conversation to be having.
Thanks, Catherine. There we go. Thanks, Catherine. So even though I'm Rob McKinney, I'm CEO of what says up there Ravn, Alaska, but I'm the one probably schizophrenic up here because I'm also representing Northern Pacific Airways and Float Shuttle. And so even though we're on the surface, looks like the old school traditional, carbon emitting, burning airline, we either are operating or going to be operating either from Cessna Caravans at 9 seats to Havilland Dash 8s at 50 seats to Boeing 757s at 200 seats, going from as short as 20 miles to over 4,000 miles, depending on which segment and which brand we're talking about. So advanced air mobility is just really, really important to us as far as not only just the health of our planet and being good stewards, but also just from an economic standpoint, it just really, as we get into it, it makes really good economic sense to be able to bring air service to more people at a more affordable cost so that more people can actually participate in aviation. We really need these advanced air mobility and technology solutions.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Before we get deeper into this conversation, I think it's important for everyone in the room that isn't deeply involved in the aviation sector to understand some of the past work that's happened in aviation and just to give a sense of the market size and how it's grown. So I wanted to pass it over to Catherine to give a bit of a past history of where we are and where we're going.
Sure. Yeah, I think I sort of think about the growth and evolution in the industry through the lens of sort of capital flows. So clearly sort of innovation in the aviation industry is not new. It's the hallmark and the heart of this industry, and over the course of its entire history. And we've sort of looked to and relied on kind of traditional players to play that role and have been sort of critical to innovating in the space over time. But over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen kind of the emergence of sort of separate standalone businesses, engineers that are really coming out of other ecosystems that have innovated and kind of setting up sort of a lens, if you will, on the space. If we look at kind of just the last maybe 2015 to 2020, we saw deals that were primarily supported by venture capital providers in this space increase over 120%. And that includes other parts of kind of new mobility tech as well. But that's quite extraordinary. And in the absence of that acceleration of capital deployment, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. I mean, it's really been able to support kind of the introduction of new solutions, new areas of innovation, as well as kind of new potential operators, infrastructure, and has really given cause for this industry to really be thinking more holistically and partnering. And that doesn't even include the billions of dollars that have been deployed, what we saw really in the SPAC market in 20 and 21. Today's market, we can maybe talk about that at the end, is a slightly different story. But we still continue to see capital providers be quite constructive here. And so I think from our perspective, it gives us a lot of confidence in the success and the future of a lot of these technologies, that will ultimately kind of lay the foundation for AAM and what that looks like.
Awesome. Yeah, so as we talk about capital inflows, I think it's great that we have a few operators here to talk about the tangibility of this industry. I think when I first came into it, flying cars sounded really far off, and for some it may still be a ways off. So I wanted to hear a little bit more from each of you about tangibly, what are the business models, to take Graham's point in the hydrogen panel? I thought it was a great point of morality won't accelerate this. It may move policy, but I think we need to think about the tangibility of the business models first to really think about adoption and transition in this aviation sector. So would love to kind of hand it over, see who wants to chat about some of these business models you're finding particularly compelling in AAM.
Sure, I'll go. For us, really, it's connecting the existing aviation infrastructure to the public. That the aircraft are there, and like motorcycles and boats, they sit in a hangar, right? And so it's a shame that they sit there. And so there's a huge supply availability that we can absolutely make more accessible to people. And then it gets people used to doing that, making that a thing that they can depend on and they can use as part of their mobility toolkit, right? And so there's a huge business model there, just making that accessible. And then as the future comes with the EV toll stuff, it's now people have practiced doing that. They can fit into the repertoire of the way they travel, and that will help bring adoption there as well.
Nice.
So yeah, one of the things a lot of people don't realize if you're not an operator is the cost of overhauling a gas turbine engine, and both it's limited by how many hours you fly it, but also it's limited by how many cycles that you put on it, how many times you start and stop it and take off and land it. And on a small scale, on a Cessna Caravan, it's a $400,000 overhaul to overhaul one of these engines. And on one of the mid-sized Dash 8s, it's $1 million to overhaul one of these engines. So when we start looking at replacing a Dash 8 with a hydrogen solution, or we look at an EV or an electrical solution for a Cessna Caravan, to just wipe that cost out of there really operate or lower the direct operating costs by as much as 35 and 40%. So it really does actually physically move the financial needle for us. And again, it's like Chris said, it's not just because it's the right thing to do, it's because the smart and it's a financial thing to do. And it also makes it so that we can offer service into lower yield cities and offer it to more places that don't have air service now because of those prohibitive costs.
Danny, what are you seeing?
Yeah, what we're seeing here is probably a crawl, walk, run type of arrangement. And I think when you talk about tangible opportunities today, the things that we can become better at is using, say, SAF fuels, going into, and that's an opportunity from an investment side in BC and in Canada, because we're a little, I'll call it green in Canada on that. There's some really novel things happening in the US on SAF fuels by some of the majors and so forth. But here we're trying to grow that program here, because if we can start using biofuels in our aircraft today, we're cutting our footprint down by 80%. And that's easy to do if we can get supply in here and storage in here and so forth. So that would be one example. Another example is probably the technologies that we're looking at and the opportunities for one day seeing the Jetsons in reality is probably hybrid technology that's coming along. So to the point that we were talking earlier, our good friends at Harbour Air electrifying their engines on their seaplanes, that's a great start to move forward. And using conventional aircraft, well, why not change the engines in helicopters as well and start greening out that way? So those would be two realistic
Yeah,
business
no, and I
cases.
think I think everything you guys have said is spot on. And I think it sort of just depends as an investor, sort of where you're trying to play the space more broadly, right? If you're thinking about kind of near-term opportunities, I think it was in the last panel where the moderator said, looking for the steak through the sizzle. So we're obviously in a marketplace where everyone's sort of looking for the steak. What's the tangible value today? And whether it's biofuels trying to solve the challenge around the feedstock market, which is a big part of what makes sort of SAF challenging to scale for the existing industry, but solutions around alternative fuel sources is definitely something that the industry, especially commercial operators like the airlines, are very focused and invested in finding solutions there today. And so for the investors in the room that are kind of looking where's really the near-term opportunity set, that's where you have a whole ecosystem that is laser focused on coming up with those answers now. And then you have kind of all of the sort of medium and longer term innovators that are focused really on kind of its electrification or autonomy, maybe hybrid energy sources as well. And I think it's a really good point to mention that not only is that a part of ESG and decarbonization, that's a part of margin expansion. That's a part of bringing costs down. I mean, there is real shareholder value created if you're able to bring down certain key operating cost components. And so, although those are further afield, the impact, never mind the social impact of making, air travel services more affordable, more accessible, which is a huge marketplace, and there's plenty of infrastructure today that's not even being leveraged that could be utilized there. There's just also a real sort of good, strong business case. So I think all these points are really good ones.
The margin expansion one is a big one, right? That you run a scheduled airline where you've optimized that schedule in a way that it stays full almost all the time, because it's expensive to fly empty aircraft. And the same thing, right, where you don't do much of that. For us, charter is absolutely the other way around, where half the time the aircraft is empty. That's the existing standard. And so for us, the margin expansion is filling those empty legs. And then the green side of that is we're not burning fuel with nobody on the plane, right? And so all of that for us, we've got some options where we can bring down the price, or we can increase margin, or do a little bit of both to make that more accessible to folks.
Great points all around. I'd love to jump into kind of thinking into the future. I think there's been a lot of hype in this industry. When I first got into this industry, everyone was talking about these flying cars and thinking about how far it was going to grow. There were these SPACs that were taking off that seemed to just be pushing the boundaries of what was capable. And then when I got into this industry, I started learning about the regulatory frameworks and started learning about the barriers that were being faced by these hundreds and hundreds of OEMs. So would love to hear a little bit more, starting with perhaps Catherine, about the future of this industry, and then hear from a few of the operators about what they see.
Yeah, I think, and I always try to be very disciplined about not using the word flying cars. I just feel like it goes both ways, it cuts both ways. But no, I think in terms of, thinking about the marketplace today, so I sort of initially was talking about kind of the venture capital or early capital flows that we've seen sort of over the last 5 to 8 years. But today's market is a little bit more challenged. There's, new risk factors that investors are focused on, whether they're geopolitical, inflationary, recessionary, that have definitely, created a slowdown that we've seen in sort of the public markets. We've only seen kind of over 12 IPOs year to date, 5 pulled. That's, in quite a contrast to last year. But what we're seeing on the private market side is still a fairly constructive tone. Now, what is happening is processes are being elongated, right? And investors are using additional time to really dig in and be, diligent on certain risk factors that were a little bit less of a focus, as, the more sort of in focus item was sort of your growth CAGR on your top line. And so, what have we seen investors focusing more on, which I think is very much goes hand in hand in terms of who will sort of be, winners and losers through this period of challenge. And that's, that's everything from, of course, bottom line, and I think this was also mentioned in the last session, is kind of having the right team, whether that's the humility in the team, the capability in the team, obviously the right tech, but also how advanced is the development of the technology. And something something that we've seen that's been a little bit of a shift is where is the tech today and what's the value in the technology today? So we talk a lot about whether it's eVTOL or it can be, CTOL as well, but there's already technology that's been developed that's either been patented or on its way to being patented, or some people have actually brought in and acquired IP from some legacy businesses that create a lot of value today and could be valuable to the aviation industry more broadly, irrespective of where that individual business ends up. And so kind of really diligencing the value of sort of the tech development today. Definitely a lot more focus around certification timelines, and seeing a lot of incredible teams be so thoughtful about the strategy and approach they have to cert. And quite frankly, those that have de-risked their certification or commercial strategy, either by having sort of some type of revenue source today where they actually are operating for someone or they are actually providing a service to a partner, which augments their path to the longer term vision, right? Whether that's electric, whether it's autonomous, whether it's sort of electrifying an existing or going green in an existing operator, kind of what is the value today that will allow the business to not only be either EBITDA positive, sooner or maybe today already, but that will also augment the path to understanding sort of what is, depending on where you are, the regulator, the aviation authority, sort of looking for and kind of informing your view of the tech development. So it's really an interesting conversation going on that's by no means just negative for the sake of being negative. It's just much more diligent. And so, I think where we've just seen some incredible teams shine is actually in these more intense diligence sessions and investors really spending time, and then quite frankly being even more partnered in terms of getting either the business off the ground or bringing the right ecosystem of industry partners or investors to really support these innovators kind of get across this hump, if you will.
Really nice. From the operators, any future thoughts on AAM?
From our side and what we're seeing through CAAM, through the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium that we're a part of, is really trying to get some visual progress sooner than later. And, everybody's hungry to see the technology move around and see the benefits of that technology. So I think we're pretty focused on trying to get some case studies going on sooner than later. And one of the best ways we feel as a consortium is to look at certain sectors, and healthcare is a big one. If we can really focus in on healthcare, because really if we can demonstrate these technologies helping people that need help, more so than buying a ticket to go to Victoria or Nanaimo, which has, like it or not, the optics that's not for me, that's for somebody else. We got to break that psyche, and healthcare is one way where we can prove the technology, advance it, and then move it into passenger carrying, cargo carrying opportunities. So
you're referencing EMS, so like life flight helicopters, or?
Well, things like that, or today, for instance, we move organs for BC organ transplant. Our partner Blade is one of the largest, if not the largest, med mobility companies now in the United States, moving organs and so forth. I think we need to focus on that. Today, we landed an aircraft on the top of Vancouver General Hospital. It can lift 3,000 pounds. We had to move a heart, which weighed 5 pounds. And it cost $6,000 to move it for 10 minutes, and it put a monstrous carbon footprint out there. What can we do with new drone technology and so forth to build a sandbox, as it was explained this morning, with the regulators and test fly that case?
Yeah, really good points on importance of sequencing. I think we see a lot more sequencing kind of already at play, meaning whether it's healthcare use cases, organ transfer, cargo obviously being such a hotbed for innovation, where these areas of the market are sort of hungry for more cost efficient, lower carbon solutions, but the demand and the marketplace continues to be robust on the cargo side, if not even more on fire sort of post pandemic. And so what you see also is kind of traditional. I think about the Beta Technology capital raise and their partners on the organ side as well as on the cargo side, who are also being very vocal about their ambitions to electrify, to come up with, maybe autonomous solutions. And so when you have sort of big industry heavyweights saying, this is a part of my sustainability strategy, this is a part of my shareholder value creation strategy, it gives these new areas of innovation a place to thrive, apply, and then quite frankly create sequencing so that there's more community education around the merits of this technology, more understanding, so that when that certification occurs, we can start to unlock and think about passenger use cases.
And for us, it's really making the industry transparent. I think that's something that's close at hand that we can do, that lets the general public look and say, yeah, I can't afford this, or no, I can't afford this. But now it's got a mind share, right? That like, I read your mind now because you think about it. It's always there. You can check it again next time and see if maybe next time it'll be cheaper. But now you've incorporated into your I'm going to travel somewhere list of things to go look at. And so by making it transparent, I think both from the economics of it, but also like the sustainability side of it, we can say, this is an electric flight, or this is a hybrid flight, or this is a sustainable aviation fuel flight. And so you've got some transparency there into what you're going to go buy. And you, the user, get to pick and choose, okay, I want to do an all-electric flight, but that means that my flight circle is this big now. Or I'll do a hybrid flight, and so I can get to this or that or the other city. And so giving that transparency to the customer so they can make choices and start to think about how they would fit that into their travel budgets.
So I'd like to just also echo what Danny said. I think it's super important to get the technology out there and get it into use, and we do have to crawl before we can walk or run. And so that's why traditionally we've been really full support against these the companies that modify existing aircraft, because as you look at aviation, you always have to look through the lens of regulation. And the joke inside of us as operators, if the paperwork doesn't equal the gross weight of the flight, then you've missed something. So you just can't ignore that aspect of it. So as much as the sizzle is out there with all these really cutting edge technologies that we're all really excited about, we're big believers of the perfect can't be the enemy of the good. So that's the reason we really believe in the retrofitting an existing aircraft with an electric motor, or retrofitting our existing Dash 8s with hydrogen fuels and those kinds of things, because we think sooner that we get that technology out there and the public gets used to it and gets adoption, then that's just going to accelerate the next step and the next step till we get to that ultimate sizzle.
Great points all around. I wanted to give the panelists here a chance to kind of share some thoughts, given the audience in the room here, what they would want to share with this group, given their positions as operators or investment banking. I think we ended up having a great conversation in the green room about some of the things they would want this group to know about. So I want to just hand it over to the panel. If I may.
Yeah, sure. I think, and I sort of touched on this before, but I think for those that are operators and innovators, as well as those who are investors sort of thinking about this space, knowing that there is still, significant capital out there that is being sort of constructive around this ecosystem. I do think what's been fascinating and has perhaps exceeded my expectations is just the incredible support of the more sort of traditional elements of the industry to either invest, partner, really inviting innovation and helping a lot of these businesses kind of move forward. And I think that married with capital that's willing to take the time to really understand the value proposition of the technology or the specific market that's been underdeveloped, that the either operator or tech player is actually looking to basically unlock or build. I think there is a real constructive bid out there. And so, for those that maybe feel a little bit more wary because of the market backdrop, I can say just in processes that are ongoing or that have been completed, and I mentioned Beta before, I feel like that transaction is really emblematic of high quality blue chip investors alongside kind of partner, Amazon and others really coming into the stack and really partnering with such an extraordinary team. I think it speaks to the fact that even in today's environment, if you have the right team, tech, innovators, and that you can be sort of nimble in your approach, there are real opportunities for capital to be deployed.
Maybe along the same lines Catherine was saying, I think one thing that investors should consider too is government. There is participation, there's strong participation in British Columbia and in Canada. So, 3Ps and so forth is an opportunity for private capital to come in and not take all the risks, because the government wants this, BC wants this, the infrastructure side of the whole program here. Small example, we'll spend $1 million buying green vans this year, putting charging stations at all our heliports, and the rebate system and the government support is going to take about 60 to 70% of that number out. So we're having to put 30 or 40. And when you start talking larger numbers like CIB and so forth, they're all there. So I think what the messaging is, the projects can be partnered up so risk is reduced.
Well, as someone who purchased a bankrupt airline in the middle of a pandemic, I know a little bit about risk. I do believe, though, that there are so many really exciting things right on the cusp of happening, and it's really going to take capital to push it over the finish line. And it's just an amazing time that we have right here for us. And I really look at the economic pauses, hiccups, as you might, as true opportunities. There's the people out there that really look at the contrarian way at coming at investment money, and I think this space is a perfect way to approach that, because the technology is moving forward, and it needs that capital to help get it across the finish line. And not only will we be better as operators because it's more economically efficient to be so, but we're going to be better as a society because we'll be less polluters and be more green and friendly and all that. But really, this really is an excellent time to, while the herd is thin, so to speak, to strike while the iron's hot and make a big difference.
I'd really echo that opportunity side of things, that the way people live and move, it has absolutely changed in the last 2 years, right? That people have spread out more, that they're less close to their international airport and they're more close to a local airport, and they value their time differently, and all of those things stack up. So there's a huge demand now for that advanced air mobility, right? That folks before they looked at it as a luxury or not for me kind of a thing, really consider it now, right? They're like, now I have 2 kids and I wish that I could fly places and not sit in a car for 8 hours or whatever it is. And so just, right, yeah, that it's one of those things that now people actually want it and would consider it for lots of different reasons that they wouldn't have before. So there's a huge pool of folks who are now in the market for it that weren't before.
I think that's a really good point. I think also one thing we hear in investor conversations is how advancements in technology on the ground with EVs, autonomy in EVs, I mean, how even that adoption curve and that kind of community education has increased people's openness and understanding of the evolution, the future of this space. So I think it's a good point.
Great points. I see we somehow are ahead of schedule here. Wanted to check in with this question. This keeps coming back when I'm in these panels, listening to how we're seeing all of these different transportation modes kind of start to integrate more with their tech stack and think more about an intermodal journey. Aviation has typically been in its own silo. It's had its own airport and its own entire transportation. You've got all the way to get to the airport, then you've got to go through security. I'd be curious to the panel and hear where you see this fitting in the new transportation mix, if anyone has any thoughts on that.
That one's huge for us, right? That as you start to fly private, you're going to small airports, and you're going to not the international terminal, right? So if you type into Google, Hillsborough Aviation, which one of those terminals do you end up at? I don't know, but I need to know, because if you do that, your journey on KinectAir starts lost at a big tin metal shed somewhere, right? And that's a terrible way to do business. And so for us, that transportation on the ground matters a whole bunch, of figuring out how they get from door to the hangar to where they need to go, and is there Uber on the other side? Can they rent a car? Is there a taxi service? We have to know those kinds of things to really make that journey possible, right? That we could do the flight part of it, but if you end up somewhere you can't rent a car and can't get Uber, now what good is it? Like, you know, if somebody can pick you up, that works, but we have to tell you that, the customer, ahead of time. And so being able to change modes of transportation, but also to understand them digitally, right? So that up front, I can tell the customer what's available. I can connect those other dots to make that possible. That's what makes that, you know, door-to-door transportation, that's what we're all looking for, right? They're like, I don't want to fly somewhere, I want to be somewhere. And so connecting those other dots is huge for us.
I think that's exactly right. So intermodality is where it's at for us. That heliport that's sitting outside there needs to be even closer. And some people will scream and kick and say, no way. But really, it's got to be intermodal, where someone gets off the aircraft can take the sea bus over to North Vancouver, or take the train out to Port Coquitlam, or you know, take a taxi or an Uber or otherwise. And I think that intermobility is so key to the transportation system, where you can buy one ticket and just get to your final destination. It's not about what mode of travel you need.
So our first model, the float shuttle model, to get people off the roads in Southern California and fly them to work, we were making great traction as we come up on March of 2020, where the traction kind of stopped. But in any event, we were making good traction because we were starting with companies that were located within a half a mile or so of one of these general aviation airports in Southern California, which was great. But again, once we were expanded and once we would have gotten bigger, the intermodal part would have been that. What's that last mile? How do you get that person on to their job? Would have been super critical to the business model. So I think that technology, whether it's the app or the EV car or the automated car, is just going to be so critical going forward, so that we don't have people sitting in their cars for 3.5 hours just sitting in traffic doing nothing.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk today about the 50-minute city, or about creating more livable cities and needing to rethink our cities and how we move throughout them. And I think this really ties into that piece of, we can't just think about electrification of airplanes. We can't just think about building an app. We need to think about the entire user experience and how that actually benefits the citizens within the cities. Any other comments on this point? I think it seems like a good way to end.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would just echo is how much that feeds into just, you know, accessibility and livability, and kind of thinking about secondary, tertiary cities. I think in the U.S., for trips that are done somewhere between 50 to 500 miles, 93% of those trips are done in the car, which is sort of mind-boggling. And it's not for lack of infrastructure, which is like such a fascinating element of it too, because exactly what you were saying, it kind of like, I think 90% of the U.S. population, at least, lives within 30 minutes of a general aviation airport. And that's only like 50 to 60% in similar proximity to larger commercial hubs. And so there is sort of this ecosystem of infrastructure that is ready to just be tapped. And there's a lot of reasons, if you look at kind of our history in the industry, that either regional, you know, carriers or contracted carriers, charter carriers, have pulled back from operating in a lot of those locations for, you know, because basically the economics didn't make sense. And so new operators that are focused on bringing that market back to life, and coming up with the cost-efficient way of doing it to make it viable, profitable, and then ultimately scalable, is just an area of, it feels like a little bit of a low-hanging fruit area of innovation. I think we've talked so much about eVTOL and UAM, which is extraordinary as well, but there's also this element of a whole ecosystem that can be tapped without new infrastructure, you know, with existing, you know, certified aircraft, like thinking about a Cessna Caravan, or, you know, other aircraft. And so I think that's an area which maybe has gotten a little less sizzle, but it's actually way, in some ways, very sort of near-term tangible, if we can bring some of these technologies and operators, you know, forward.
Great points. Yeah, I was just thinking as you were speaking, thinking about these next kind of few years, maybe 5 even to 2030, as improving asset utilization with strategic injection of technology changes, and then beyond 2030 of kind of transportation reimagination, of saying now we have all of these proven safe technologies that we've integrated in different ways. If we think now about how we might reimagine that with that tech stack, what could be possible, instead of waiting until we're at 2030 and then trying to reimagine once we have a system that's embedded. Wanted to open it up to the group for some questions while we have just a few minutes left. I don't know if we have a spare mic down here. Yes, please.
And all the new green technology and flights and stuff, how pandemic-proof is it?
Yeah, of next time around, what does that look like? For us, being spread out, we've got a lot of options that you don't have when you get funneled through an international airport, that you get to do this one person at a time or 5 people at a time. And so both options from the aircraft choice to the customer's choice, right, of like how they want to handle it personally, that you don't have when you've got a line of 1,000 people going through an airport. And so in that respect, I think we're able to weather that storm. As far as like the economics going up and down, there's definitely some hurdles to if we go into a really deep depression, that would be rough on everyone. But trying to come up with business models that don't have that downside risk near as heavily as the existing airlines do. That like all of the big airlines took huge bailouts because it hurt, right? That they had infrastructure that was highly leveraged, and they had to keep it busy to make it do its thing. And so for us, coming up with business models that are more flexible, that as they can throttle up and then throttle back down again, is important to us looking to the future because of that.
I also think that there's a big difference from a first time around to a next time around. First time around, we were scared to death because we literally didn't know if this next thing was going to kill us if we went outside the door. And I think now that we've been through this and we've seen the data and we've seen the statistics and we saw what's safe and what's not safe, we see that the air on airplanes is actually cleaner than some air in hospitals, and we see that there is a way to do it safely. So I'm a big believer in, like, I certainly do not want another pandemic, but I don't think it will be nearly as bad, just because as a people we know how to handle it better than we did the first time, because it was unknown territory.
Yeah, and the one other thing I would just add is that whether we're talking, Helijet or, Blade or Kinect, or I think all of these, or, Joby, Beta, all of these areas of innovation are also kind of focusing on sort of smaller aircraft too, which is actually an interesting element. As you democratize air travel further, you're talking about a lot more assets and a lot more frequency, but a much smaller, cabin, if you will. And so there's elements of that too, which can kind of, in a challenging period, make the economics still work, even if there's only a few people on board.
Great question. Other questions? Hands up. Wherever you want to go.
I'm just curious, where do you see the largest talent gaps to enable scale? From all of this innovation that we've been discussing, smaller cabins, I assume you still need the pilots and lots of new skills.
I see the gap in the regulatory side. So I think the resources at Transport Canada, Nav Canada, in Canada anyways, is really the restrictor right now, and not to their fault. It's just they're resource limited. Some experience limited in trying to keep up to the technology and where it wants to go and where the consumer wants it to go. So I think that one there is where we're trying to work harder with our regulators to get them in that early stage, well before, while it's still an idea in the head, not on the drawing board or not beyond the drawing board, to let them catch up and absorb and put resources against it.
I would have to agree. For the United States, it's exactly the same way. Whether it's an arcane artificial rule like a mandatory age limit regardless of someone's health, or whether it's a arbitrary limit of when you can upgrade to the right seat of a certain size airplane based on number of hours and not a skill, or whether it's just slow down in regulation when it comes to allowing planes to go fly direct using new technology. There's definitely the bottleneck is on the regulatory side.
I'd echo that. that for us, we'd love to sell single seats on a flight, right? That like if I have a small aircraft and you want 2 of the 6 seats, I would love to sell the other 4 to somebody else, but I can't until I step into other regulation territory, and that just becomes a nightmare for us. So for us, figuring out ways of letting this safely operate in a way that the FAA can get their hands on, but let us digitize it, right? Let us break that into small pieces.
The only thing I would just add to that, and it's clear where the pain point is to some degree in the industry of everyone trying to move as fast as possible. We have so much great engineering talent and operating talent and commercial talent that's just hard charging, and it's that part may not be pacing, but there's also an element of not just those that are either determining new regs, rulemaking capabilities, or certification, is also the sort of regulatory sort of education component too. It's incredible to me in terms of the conversations we have with investors, and not every investor lives in aviation, how sometimes the education in terms of technology or certification processes or what has been certified and where there's been innovation to date is not well understood. And so sometimes from a capital provider perspective, there's just more fear around even talking about, well, this could never be certified. Well, there's many examples of incredible innovation that has been certified for years and years ago. The FAA actually operates as a support to innovation. And so not just regulatory, but I think also just, education.